Good afternoon, everyone. So last class we ended talking about payday loans, going over examples on why you shouldn't take them out. So today we're basically going to be talking a little bit more about loans, a couple quick reminders. Looking for, if anyone's interested, economics and finance majors that might be interested in walking with the department Jeep parade and the homecoming parade Saturday morning. If you're interested, email by today. I got to let the department chair know to make sure that we get a t-shirt set aside for you. We are on track to make our quiz day next Tuesday. Right, so looking back at syllabus. Right, baked in there, I've got a little flexibility built in. So next Tuesday, we're not going to be meeting in class. You'll have the day to finish up your assignments. So I definitely recommend not waiting until the last minute to work on everything you have due, but you have some extra time to get that done. So no class meeting on Tuesday. Time to finish up your assignments. Again, those assignments are your assignments are on D2L under assessments and quizzes. Your homework, quiz, exam, they're all listed under here. All right, so I got the due dates on there as well. What else as far as announcements?
You know how many chapters we're going to be going over in this class?
In the class overall, it's broken up into 6 units. Yes. Yeah, and you can look ahead and see those counted out for you on the assessments.
There's going to be 6 homeworks and 6 quizzes?
Correct. 6 homeworks, 6 quizzes, and then 1 comprehensive exam. Yep.
Or just one exam?
Yes.
It's going to be like the finals or not?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just to make sure, homework 1 and 2 are based on chapter 1. I mean, quiz 1.
Say it again.
Homework 1 and homework 2 are based on quiz 1
and 2.
Oh, I got it.
Quiz 1 and 2
Oh,
as well.
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a lot of carryover in
Okay,
what I break up the due dates on. So, yeah. And make sure you use all 3 of your homework attempts. That's going to be a great prep for the quiz itself. You're only graded on the highest attempts for your homework, so use all 3 attempts that are available to you. And I'll hang around after class today. If anyone has any questions, we can talk about it then. For those of you that already started your homework, I think most of you already have. So if you have questions, I'll hang around for a bit and we can talk about that. Anything else? All right. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about types of loans, just as a primer on the discussion we're going to have looking at basically a loan schedule and also looking at what mortgage payments look like. All right, so a pure discount loan, right, in general, a loan is money that you borrow and you're going to be paying interest on it. So a pure discount loan is the type of loan that you're going to be issued that's issued at a discount to face value, meaning say you're going to borrow $900 and you're going to have to pay back $1,000. That would be a pure discount loan. Right? So that additional money that you're paying is functionally just interest that you're paying on this loan. Pretty straightforward setup. All right, so, I forgot that I baked in an example to the slide. So if you borrow $1,000, you're going to pay back over 3 years, 10% per year. You borrow $1,000 today, and in other words, you could pay back $1,300 in the future. Then there's interest-only loans. So this type of loan, basically you're just paying the interest each period, and then at the end of the loan, you're paying the entirety that you borrowed. All right, so basically what we're looking at are different structures for how you're going to be paying loans back over time. All right, so similar setup, $1,000 loan paid over 3 years at 10%. We're paying $100 per year for 3 years. That is the interest that we're paying down. On the 3rd year, we'll pay $1,000. Total payback of $1,300. All right, so notice a little bit difference in the amount of interest that we're paying back. With the pure discount loan, we paid a total of $1,331. Right? So $331 in interest. And the total payback with a interest-only loan, it was $1,300. So we saved a little bit in interest. Why do you think we saved a little bit in interest with an interest-only loan relative to the pure discount loan?
The interest only been added on to the principal.
Exactly. Right. So with the pure discount loan, we're just allowing interest to compound over time. We're not paying any off intermittently. With the interest-only loan, we're paying a little bit of that interest earlier on in the loan's life, so it's not compounding as much. Right? It's not being added to the principal. You're not being charged additional interest for. You're not being charged additional interest for the interest that you're paying off. Right. So basically, we're avoiding an interest charge with the interest compounding. And then we have an amortized loan. And this is a little bit more typical of the sorts of loans that we're going to be dealing with. So in this, you're going to pay interest and a part of the principal in each period. All right, so when you pay off part of the principal in regular repayments, that's just going to be referred to as amortizing the loan. And within this structure, it's possible to have fixed principal payments and fixed total payments. Those are the typical payments that we're going to see, right? If you take out a mortgage and auto loan, typically you're going to have a fixed payment. That's the standard loan structure that people tend to take out. And usually the general idea behind having this fixed total payment is it basically just gives us a easier structure to plan our income around. Right? If you know what you're going to be paying every month, it helps you plan out the rest of your expenses during that month, right? So if you're making, say, $3,000 a month, you have $1,000 due in rent, you know you have to save at least $1,000 of your monthly income to go directly towards rent that you're going to be paying. So that consistency just helps people plan out their expenses over the course of a month. So like I mentioned, we can have fixed payment, fixed principal, and we're going to be looking at the differences between these. Again, the difference is going to be in basically how much interest are we going to be charged on this loan. And it's going to be slight differences, but those slight differences can add up over time. So if we want to use a formula, which we're going to be using a table and Excel functions, but basically what we're dealing with is the annuity formula. And if we want to figure out how much we're going to be paying on a loan, we basically just use a little bit of algebra with the annuity formula to get the payment by itself. But again, thankfully, Excel already has this taken care of, so we can use an Excel function to calculate this payment for us using the standard time value inputs that we need to use. Can anyone remind me, what are the 4 components of time value that we deal with? Rate,
present value,
future value, and
Number of periods.
number of periods. Yeah, those are the 4 inputs that we're going to be dealing with. Right. So with the payment amount, this is basically just estimating how much we're going to be paying in order to borrow something today at a given interest rate over a given amount of time. All right. So let's pop over into our Excel workbook. All right, so let's say that we take out a $10,000 for your business loan at 6.5%. Payments are going to be made each year. What are your annual payments? All right, so again, unless anything is otherwise stated, we assume cash flows occur at the end of the year. We assume annual compounding. All right, so we're going to be using the payment function in order to make this calculation. So we have our payment. All right, so we're going to have our interest rate, 6.5%. Make sure you include that percentage point or put it in decimal format. Right? If you don't include the percentage point, it's going to assume that the rate is input in percentage format. So 6.5 in percentage format really means, what is that? 6,500%. Right? Drastically different than what we're dealing with here. So make sure you either leave it in decimal format of 0.065 or 6.5%. Very important that you keep that in mind. You're going to get some wild answers if you forget about that. All right, so we have a 6.5% interest rate. What's our time period that we're dealing with? 4 years. All right. Now the information we need is the present value, right? Think about it this way. We're getting the loan right now, so that's going to be our present value. This payment that we're calculating is going to be a future cash outflow that we're going to be making. All right, so in other words, it's going to be the future payments that we're dealing with. All right, so our loan today is going to be $10,000. When I hit enter, we get a negative sign here, right? What did I forget to do?
Negative sign.
Negative sign on what? Yeah. All right, so you get the negative sign on there, and it's telling us that we're going to be paying $2,900. In terms of paying out a loan on a cash flow basis, that does make sense, right? This is going to be $2,900 out of our pocket every year over the next 4 years. All right. Now we're going to start putting this into an amortization table, right? So what this table is basically doing, it's similar to a cash flow table, but the difference is now we're looking at, we're on the other side of the equation, and we're looking at how much we're borrowing and how much we're paying off every year. All right, so our beginning balance is going to be how much we borrow. We calculated our payment. So I'll just be a little lazy and reference up above. Copy and paste that down. Oh, I should note this is a fixed payment loan, right? The standard setting. Now we're going to calculate our interest, principal paid, and ending balance. All right, so interest is going to be based on how much money we have outstanding. So if we have a $10,000 loan and we're being charged 6.5%, we're going to be charged $650. From here, we can figure out how much principal we're paying down on this loan. It's just going to be the difference between how much we're paying and how much interest is being deducted. Now we get our ending balance, which is the difference between what we start with, the $10,000 loan, and how much principal we paid this year. All right, so basically what's going on here is we see how much we borrowed, how much we paid, keeping in mind what we're paying isn't just principal, it's also interest that we're paying off on this loan. All right, so the interest is going to be our beginning balance times our interest rate, and how much we're paying on principal in that year is the difference between the payment that we're making in total, right? We have a fixed payment each of these 4 years, minus the interest that we are paid. Once we have the principal payment, we can find the ending balance within that year. All right, so only difference here, we can start copy and pasting this down in a moment, is just getting our beginning balance. So the beginning balance of the next year is going to be the ending balance of the previous year. So once we get that, now we can copy and paste our information down. That'll update itself. Copy down our interest. Copy down our principal. Copy down our balance. All right, so we're going from the full balance of the loan all the way down to the loan being completely paid off at the end of the 4-year period. And there's a bit of information that we can see going on here. What's happening with the interest payment over time? It's going down. Why is the interest payment going down? Exactly. The balance that we're being charged interest on is declining. So if the amount of money that we're being charged interest on declines, then the amount of interest declines over that time as well. But our payment is staying fixed. So if our interest payment is declining, what's increasing? Yeah, the principal payment, right? And this is the standard structure with most loans that you'll be taking out. Earlier on in a loan's life, typically people pay more in interest. Later on in the loan's life, we pay more toward principal. That's the general structure, right? When you get to the end of a mortgage, you're paying mostly principal amount. At the beginning of a mortgage, you're paying mostly interest. And that's the typical structure for an amortized loan that people are going to be taking out. All right, so let's get the total amount of interest that we're going to be charged. Just sum up value. Right, so the total interest that we were charged over this time period was just under $1,700. Any questions on the amortization table? So again, we assume this is a fixed payment loan. That's the go-to assumption when we're putting together a loan. We assume a fixed payment decision, but we can also have a fixed principal loan. So now rather than estimating the payment, right, which we already did above with the payment function, we're going to be estimating a fixed principal payment. All right, so we're going to start off with our beginning balance, $10,000 again. But we're going to be working backwards from what we were just doing with the fixed payment loan. So the principal paid is just going to be the $10,000 divided by 4. All right, so we're paying off $2,500 each year, right? At the end of 4 years, we're going to have paid off the loan entirely. So we're going to work backwards now and figure out how much interest we're going to be charged on each loan. And then we'll be able to get the total payment. Right, so with the fixed payment, we're starting from the payment amount calculation and working our way back. With the fixed principal, we're starting with the principal paid, then estimating our interest and payment. We can get our ending balance already, and we'll get there in a moment. So we can start with our setup now. So beginning balance is going to be the last year's balance. Copy that down. The ending balance is the difference between what we start with and what we paid. Again, the loan is going to be paid off in full at the end of these 4 years. Only difference is we're paying more in principal earlier on. So if we're paying more principal earlier on, what do you think is going to happen to the total interest that we're paying over this loan's life? The interest increases? So not quite, right? Think about what's happening to our balance here, right? Look at the second year's loan balance, $7,500 versus the $7,700, right? So this is the value that we're being charged interest on. So if the second year's loan balance is lower in the fixed principal structure relative to the fixed payment, we're going to be paying a little bit less interest because the initial loan balance is declining at a faster rate. So in other words, when we have less money to be charged interest on, we're going to be paying less interest out overall. All right, so we can get our interest payment. We'll take the beginning balance times our interest rate. All right, and so just to double check what I said was true, we paid out about $50 less in interest over this time period. All right, and from here, we backtrack to our payment. So the payment is going to be the sum of the principal and interest paid out. So notice, we saved about $50 in interest, but we have a less consistent monthly outflow that we're dealing with. All right, so this is generally going to be the case whenever you take out a loan. If you have a fixed principal payment, you're going to pay a little less interest, but your monthly payments are going to be significantly higher, particularly earlier on. Oh, principal paid is also just going to be the sum, but we're paying off the loan in total. Any questions so far on the amortization table? We're going to go over a couple more examples with this. All right, so let's say that we take out a $25,000 loan over 5 years at 5.75%. Payments made each year. What is the annual payment? You know, that's a little bit low. Let's update that. Let's say, well, the Fed's dropping rates now, so let's just go with 7.75. I'm just updating the interest rate. It's also better for examples. All right. Again, we're dealing with time value, so we're either going going to have information on the present value, future value, rate, or time period, and we're just going to be missing one of those. That's what we got to solve. So in this case, we're figuring out the future value of payments because it's a loan that we're going to be making. So again, using the payment function, we need the rate, 7.75%, number of periods, 5 years, and we borrowed $25,000. All right, so our payment is going to be $6,220 per year. All right, and we're going to work through this table, right? So when we're dealing with the fixed payment loan, basically we can just work from the left, work our way over until we reach the ending balance. All right, so what's going to be the beginning balance for this loan? $25,000. We already calculated our payment, right? The $6,200. So that information isn't going to change. We can just copy and paste that on down soon. Interest, how do we calculate the amount of interest we're going to be charged?
Balance times the rate.
Yes, the beginning balance times the rate. All right, so what's our principal out of this payment going to be?
Payment minus interest.
It's payment minus interest. All right, last thing we need in this row, the ending balance.
Beginning balance minus principal payment.
Yes. All right, keep in mind what our payment is being allocated to. Each payment that we're making is going to interest and or principal. Gotta leave me alone. All right, so our payments are being broken up into interest or principal payments. And it's the principal payment that's reducing our balance on the loan. So every time we pay principal on our loan, it's reducing the amount that we borrow. All right, so before we can copy and paste everything else down, the only thing we got to adjust is the beginning balance, which now is going to be equal to last year's ending balance. All right, and from here we can copy and paste everything on down. And as long as I correctly fix references, it'll work out. Yep. All right, so we start with the full balance on the loan, end with $0 owed, right? In other words, we fully paid off the loan over this time period. Again, we have a fixed payment over this entire time. We're paying $6,200 a month. What is changing is how much of that payment is being allocated toward interest or being allocated toward principal. So as we're paying off our loan, we're paying less and less in interest because we have a lower beginning balance from which to be charged interest, and we're paying more toward principal. All right, and this is the reason why over time we pay less in interest and more in principal is because we're paying down that loan balance. The more you pay down your loan balance, the less you pay in interest. That's, yes?
So I missed how you had the payment.
Okay. All right, so for this, I was lazy and just referenced the value that we already calculated. So to get the payment amount, we're going to use the payment function, PMT. All right, so Excel gives us the definition, calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. All right, it's asking us for the usual time value information. We need our rate, 7.75%. We need the number of periods, it's a 5-year loan. And we need the present value, or how much we borrowed today, $25,000. All right, so with this information, now we can get the loan payment that we're going to be making each year over those 5 years. Any other questions? You got a question in the booth? No, just, okay. So this was our fixed payment loan. Now we're going to look at a fixed principal. Right? Again, with the fixed principal, we're solving for the principal first, then we're getting our interest, and then we're getting our payment. All right, so again, we start off with $25,000. So extra zero in there. When you sign for a loan, make sure you're not accidentally putting another zero in there. All right, so the principal paid is going to be our beginning balance divided by the number of years that we're going to be borrowing, 5 years. So we're going to be paying off $5,000 every year. That makes sense, right? 5 times 5 is equal to 25. And the ending balance is the difference from our starting balance and our principal paid. All right, so when we copy and paste this down, this is automatically going to update once we put in the correct information here for the beginning balance. All right, so our beginning balance, we can get that, is the last year's ending balance. Copy and paste that down. All right, so again, we're still missing information on our interest, which we need in order to find the total payment each year. All right, so the interest we're going to be paid is based on how much loan balance we have outstanding times our interest rate. All right, so we're paying $1,900 in the first year, $387 in the last year, for a total interest of, oh, and I forgot to calculate that on the previous example, $5,800. So we can see a little bit clearer with the higher interest rate and a little bit longer time period. Right? The fixed payment loan, we're paying about $300 more in interest, but that's at the benefit of having a constant payment each year. Right? As we're about to see, we're going to have significantly different payments for the fixed rate. So to get the payment here, all we're going to do is add our principal amount and our interest. That's how we're going to be calculating that. All right, so our payment in the first year is going to be $6,900, and it's going to decline to $5,300 in the last year. All right, so very often why people choose fixed payment amounts over fixed principal is just the consistency of those payments. All right, that can make it a lot easier to plan your finances when you have these constant payments rather than this declining amount, even if that declining amount can save you significant amounts of money in interest. Any questions on the fixed principal loan? Yes.
Can I see the interest? How you got the interest again?
Yep, so when we're calculating interest, we take the beginning balance, the amount that we still owe on the loan, and multiply it by the interest that's being charged on that balance. So if we owe $20,000, we're going to be charged 7.75% interest on it. So our interest in that first year is going to be the $1,900. Then in our next year, right? After that first year, we paid off $5,000. So our interest now is going to be based on $20,000 that we owe because we, again, paid off the $5,000 principal in the previous year. So now on this $20,000, we're still being charged that 7.75%, but the total amount of interest that we're paying out is lower because our principal balance has declined. All right? And so the amount of interest we're paying declines over time as we pay down our principal. Yes?
Two questions. For the payment, the 6,000, when I put it in, I'm not getting that.
The payment, the 6,200 that we calculated?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll work through that one more time. So it's going to be equal PMT, all right, for payment, PMT payment, open parenthesis, and again, the usual time value info that it needs. So we need the rate, 7.75%, 7.75%. The number of periods, 5 years, and the amount that we borrowed, or the present value that we're taking out today, $25,000. $25,000 gets us the annual payment for $6,200. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you changed the 7.5%, and I was using the 5.75
Oh,
here.
gotcha.
That's why it was giving me the same problem.
Okay, yeah. So if nobody heard me, I changed the 5 to a 7.75. Interest rates are higher right now, so it makes a little bit more sense with the economic environment. But interest rates are coming back down, so maybe I'll have to lower it again next semester. You said you had a second question?
Oh, yeah. How do you get the principal paid in a fixed principal loan?
Sure. So you take the loan amount and divide it by the number of periods. Yeah. So we take a $25,000 loan. We're borrowing over 5 years, so I just take $25,000 divided by 5. Right? Because the principal is just a fixed amount that's taking place over the loan life. Any other questions? All right. We're going to do one more example with the loan table here. Only difference we're making now is a semi-annual payment. right? So with the semi-annual payment, we're paying a little bit more principal, a little bit earlier on, paying a little bit more interest a little earlier on. So it's going to reduce the amount of interest that we're paying overall. A little bit, but if I were to do like a monthly, the amortization table just gets unnecessarily large. All right, so we're doing a semi-annual fixed payment, right? So similar structure to the base example. So we're starting off with $25,000. And we got to calculate our payment. So it's going to be similar to the $6,200, but we're going to have to make some adjustments. Can anyone remind me what we're going to have to adjust?
Divided by 2, this is semi-annual.
What by 2?
Principal. No, sorry, the interest. So the interest?
Interest rate, yep. And what's the other factor that we're going to have to change here?
Number of periods?
Yes, exactly. All right, so again, we're still using the payment function, but we have the interest rate. So I already did that because we need to calculate the interest below. So the interest is calculated right here. Actually, I should show you. All right, so I take the 7.75% divided by 2, gets us 3.88%. So in other words, we're being charged 3.88% every 6 months. So twice per year, 3.88%. We get our payment amount. So that's going to be our rate, our number of periods. Actually, go back and fix that reference. That's not going to be changing. Number of periods is going to be 10, right? So 5 6-month intervals going to be equal to 10. And then how much we borrow, $25,000. So it should be roughly half of the $6,200, which is what we got. All right, so we got our payments. Now we'll get our interest. That's going to be how much we owe times our interest rate. Again, semi-annual interest rate, which is 3.88. We can get our principal amount. Again, take our initial balance minus, nope, I started doing that wrong. Principal paid is going to be how much we paid out minus the amount of interest that we paid. All right, so in that first 6-month period, we're paying down $2,100. So our ending balance is going to be $25,000 minus that $2,100 for $23,000. All right, so if I made my references correctly, copy paste this down, things are looking good. Make sure your beginning balance on year 2 is the ending balance on year 1. Copy and paste it on down, right? And again, we have our beginning balance, the full loan, and at the end, $0. All right, so let's see how much we paid in interest. All right, we're paying interest a little more frequently, so we should be paying a little less in interest. All right, so we went from paying $6,100 in interest to $5,600 in interest. So we saved almost $500 just by paying a little bit more frequently. Question.
Isn't this table for fixed principal?
Fixed payment. Yeah, so the last example we went over was fixed principal. Yes, this is for a fixed payment. So again, keeping the payment fixed. Right, so as a borrower, the more frequently you can pay down a loan, you'll be paying a little bit less in interest every month. Any questions? That's a loud door. Actually, might be, all right, yeah. We'll just go straight to the mortgage example. All right, so we're going to end Unit 2 going over an example on basically looking at options for a mortgage. So, all right, I'm going to change, we can keep it as is. That'll be fine. All right, so let's say that we're considered buying a house. We can afford to pay $1,500 a month for the mortgage, and we have $30,000 ready for a down payment. Payments are going to be made monthly over 30 years. Very standard setup for a mortgage, 30-year monthly payments. 4.5 interest rate, can we afford $250,000 house? All right, so first thing is we have to figure out how much we're going to be borrowing. Let me move that over. I'm going to add a couple of rows here. I'm just explicitly adding these, so I'm not adding within cell. So I'm getting the amount that we need to borrow by taking the difference between how much we're paying for the house and how much we have for a down payment. All right. So we're going to be borrowing $220,000. We have a 4.5% interest rate over 30 years. Right? I already put those adjustments that we might have to make right here, just as a reminder. Right? Payments are going to be divided by the number of months. Interest rate's going to be divided by the number of months, and the number of periods multiplied by the number of months. So 12 months per year, we're going to be adjusting M by 12. All right, so let's go ahead and get our payment. We're going to have, I'll add a couple more rows here to get that information. Rate is going to be 4.5%. Years, 30. All right. Payment is going to be 4.5% over 30 years, and we're going to borrow $220,000. So $13,000 payment. So what did I do wrong with my function here? It's yearly, right? Exactly. What format do we need this in? Monthly, right? Yeah, we're paying the mortgage on a monthly basis, so we're going to have to make these adjustments. So we're going to take the rate, divide it by, I'll put it in here, and number of periods. Again, I'll update this in a second. Now we have our monthly. All right. So this is going to be a monthly payment. If we can afford $1,500, can we afford to make this mortgage? Yeah. All right, it's below what we can afford, so we can pay it. All right. Now, let's look at how much we're paying out in total and how much interest we're paying out in total. All right, so the total amount that we're going to be paying over the life of this loan is going to be the payment amount times the number of years, 30. Actually, that's not in dollars, so I'll change that in a second. And the number of months, right? Because this is a monthly payment over 30 years. All right, so in total, we're paying out $401,000. Now we're going to look at how much interest we paid out in total. That's going to be the difference between how much we paid in total for the mortgage on the house and how much we borrowed. All right, so we paid roughly $181,000 in interest. Any questions on what we've calculated so far? Okay. All right, so the main thing that we calculated was just the payment. Again, So the main time value thing that we were calculating here was our monthly payment, adjusting for the fact that we're paying on a monthly basis, right? The default setting is annually. Right, so if you make no adjustment to the inputs that we're dealing with, you're going to be given an answer on an annual basis. All right, so the way that we make those adjustments, we divide the rate by the number of months, right? Monthly mortgage payments, times the number of periods times 12, and that gets us our monthly payment. So we're going to pay out $401,000 in total for an interest paid of $181,000. So I see very commonly, like posts on social media, they'll be looking at payments like this and saying stuff like, that's just a complete ripoff, right? You're paying $181,000 in interest. You're just being ripped off. Just rent your entire life. So there's a couple problems with that logic when starting to look at this, and we're going to see a little bit more cost benefit for holding on to asset returns over time. Right? The basic economic idea, right? If the benefit is greater than the cost, go for it. What these arguments tend to ignore is several things, right? One, people need a place to live. It doesn't matter whether you own where you're living or renting, you still gotta be somewhere to live. With this interest rate, it completely ignores what the average rate of return for a housing is in the US, right? Which I believe is similar to the equity market, somewhere between 6 and 12% average rate of return every year, right? So based on that alone, on a cost benefit, the rate of return on an annual basis for house appreciation tends to be greater than the mortgage rates, typically. On top of that, they don't factor in the opportunity cost of renting versus borrowing, right? As a renter, do you have any asset value in the apartment rental? No. With a mortgage, every time you make your mortgage payment, you're adding a little bit of principal value, and that's in addition to any potential equity appreciation that your house might experience in the future. And there's been a lot of that over the last 5 years, right? So it ignores that fact as well. And another thing that a lot of people don't keep in mind is when you're paying rent, does that rent stay fixed? Does anybody rent here? Renters? Has your rent amount increased or decreased over time typically?
Increase every year.
Yeah. That's one thing that a lot of people don't keep in mind when they're doing a cost benefit for renting versus owning is when you take out a fixed mortgage rate, that's what you're going to be paying so long as you live there. Right? So you're locking in that cost payment, and that's not increasing with inflation across time. So it might be more expensive to take out a mortgage today, and typically that is the case. Right? Earlier on in a home's life, it's typically going to be more expensive to own than to borrow. But usually within 5 to 10 years of owning a home, it typically becomes cheaper then because rents in the area typically increase at a relatively high rate relative to the mortgage, which is staying fixed. Right, so there are pros and cons to owning versus renting. There's maintenance costs and stuff like that that we're not including here as well. But paying out interest in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing if that interest is being charged on a value-adding asset. Right, in this case, a home which tends to appreciate at a higher rate than the mortgage on the home. All right, so we're going to look at a couple different situations here now with this monthly rate and how much interest we're going to be paying out based on several factors that we have some discretion over, right? Namely, the down payment, the interest rate that we're charged, and the time frame that we're taking out this loan for, right? Everything else equal, the higher our down payment, the less we're borrowing. So the less we're going to be paying in our monthly, and the less interest that we're going to be charged. With the interest rate, right? The higher the interest rate, the more interest you're going to be charged on your mortgage, the higher your monthly is going to be. And time is kind of an interesting thing here. So the less time that we pay our mortgage over, the more we pay out on a monthly basis, but the less that we're going to be charged in interest over that time. So that's one of those more trade-offs that people have to kind of consider in it. What's the best decision kind of depends on the interest rate at that time. All right, so I'll get the title in there. All right, so let's look at calculating the payment based on differing down payment amounts. So again, we're just using the payment function. We're going to use our, actually, if I fix this stuff, we can update it as we need. So I just fixed references this initial payment amount that I made, and I'm going to copy and paste this on down, and we'll update it as we need. Notice nothing is changing as I'm copying and pasting this down. So we're going to have to make some adjustments here in a moment. All right, so what's changing here is our down payment. So to get that down payment amount, we'll take the home value, fixing reference there, minus how much we're putting down. Oh, I forgot parentheses, so That's why it's out in the wrong direction. There we go. All right, so as we increase our down payment, it's reducing the monthly that we are going to have to pay on this mortgage. Again, it's just because it's a lower base of borrowing that we're being charged on. As we pay down our loan balance, we're paid less in interest because there's less balance on which there to be charged interest. It's the same idea when we're dealing with a mortgage. The more we pay down on our house, the less of a balance there is to charge the mortgage rate on, the less we're going to be paying in interest. All right, so the total payout is going to be equal to the payment. It's going to be equal to our payment times years. Fix that reference, and fix that reference as well. So the total interest that we're going to be paid out is how much we paid out overall. Oh wait, no, I messed that up. Total paid out. Fix that reference. So what I got here was the difference between what the home value is along with what our down payment was relative to how much we paid out in total. So how much we paid out in total minus the home value net equity that we would have built up through the down payment. All right, so we see that the more we pay down on our down payment, the lower our monthly, the less we pay out overall, and the less interest we're going to be charged on that loan. Right, so everything else equal, the higher down payment you can make, the cheaper it's going to be every month, the less interest you're going to pay over time. Now let's look at what happens when we update our interest rate. So now I'll allow our interest rate to change. So we had a base rate of 4.5%. So the lower our interest rate, the lower our monthly is going to be. The higher the interest rate, the higher the monthly is going to be. All right, that's why there's been a lot of discussion around home buying over the last couple of years since the Fed increased rates. Increasing interest rates significantly increase the cost of taking out a mortgage. All right, so the higher the interest rate, the higher your monthly is going to be. So the total payout, again, let's copy and paste that down. I think I got it fixed. Yep. So we got our total payout, and as we should expect, our total payout is increasing with interest rates as well. So we should also expect that the total interest that we're paying is going to increase as well. So that's going to be equal to the total amount that we paid minus the spread between, in this case we kept our down payment constant. Yep, I think that's all we got to change. So we're only dealing with a 4 percentage point spread, but we're more than doubling the interest that's being paid out over these 30 years, right? Small changes in interest rates can lead to significant changes in value over time. That's the same for whether you're earning that interest on an asset return or paying that interest on a loan that you're taking out. All right, so depending on what side of that transaction you're on, you should be very considerate of just small changes in interest rates and how they affect you. All right, lastly, we're going to be dealing with the number of periods. So we're going to go from, let's see, 347 is our year. So I'm going to allow it to drift and reference our 10 years. All right. So now we see something slightly different happening. Right? As we reduce the time of our mortgage, we're increasing the payment that we're making. Right? In other words, we're paying down the principal a lot quicker. So in order to make that happen, we have to pay a higher monthly every month. So let's look at how much we're paying out in total now, which is going to be how much we're paying every month, number of months per year, and the number of years that we're dealing with. I referenced the wrong thing. There we go. All right. So the lower our time frame for paying off the mortgage, the less we're paying out overall, even though our monthly is significantly higher, right? It's roughly double the monthly of a 30-year loan. But as we'll see, right, we're paying out a lot less in interest. It's going to be how much we paid out in total minus how much we borrowed. So increasing the time that we take to pay on our loan increases how much interest we're paying out, right? So compare that $53,000 in interest to the $181,000 over the typical 30. Right, so this is one of those things that people should consider, especially when interest rates are really high, is the time frame that they're going to be paying off the loan. The quicker you pay off the loan, the higher your monthly is going to be, yeah. So it's going to be a lot more strenuous financially, but you're going to be paying out a lot less over time, and you're going to pay significantly less interest over that time as well, right? Just because you're paying off that principal so much quicker.
So pretty much like if we decide to pay more principal, it's going to yield to less interest rate. But if we try to pay more interest rate, it's going to yield to less principal amount. Is that how?
Can you say your question again?
So pretty much if we pay more on the principal amount, it's going to yield to less of an interest rate. And
So not less interest rate, but less interest charge.
less interest
Right?
charge.
So the rate's not charging, but the balance you're being charged on interest is declining. Yeah. So you will be paying less in interest.
Would it be the same thing the other way around? If we pay more interest charge, the charge is going to yield to less on my beginning balance.
So I think what you're asking is if you pay the interest more frequently, will you pay less interest over that time? So yeah, and that's what we were looking at with the semi-annual fixed payment, right? So going from the annual interest payment of 7.5% to the semi-annual payment of 3.88%, we saved about $500 in interest over this time.
It's not going to be that much.
It depends on the setup. In a mortgage, it's going to be a little bit more interest that you would save, and that's what we're seeing in this time here to an extent. Right? We're paying more principal earlier on, so our monthly is going to be a lot higher, but the amount of interest that we're charged is going to be much lower because we're paying off our principal balance a lot faster. Any other questions?
We're gonna go back over this in another class.
I wasn't planning on it, but I mean, we can. Not clicking a day?
Not
All right, so one more short example here on a mortgage, right? But all we're going to be looking at is finding out the loan amount and then calculating the payment. All right, so similar setup. Let's say that again, $1,400 a month is going to be feasible. We have $25,000 down payment. Looking at 30-year mortgage with 5.25% interest rate, can we afford the $250,000 house? All right, so first thing we got to do is find out how much we're going to be borrowing. So how much is our loan amount going to be for? How do we calculate that? Say that again. So what's our loan amount going to be?
It's a 250 minus 25.
So the total loan amount is just the difference between what's the value of the asset that we're paying for and how much are we paying for it out of pocket at the start, right? That's getting us how much we need to borrow. So we have to borrow $225,000. So using this information, how much is our monthly payment going to be? Walk me through the steps here.
Equals PMT rate.
Which is
So it's monthly payment. So you gotta do where is it? Oh,
Five.
5.25 divided by 2.
Oh,
Is it
careful here.
12. Yes, sorry.
12. Yep.
Your
30 times 12. Yep. Because we've got a 30-year loan on a monthly basis. So 30 times 12. And then how much we're borrowing.
250.
Oh, careful. Careful.
225.
Amount. So the house is worth $250, but we have a $25,000 down payment, which is reducing the amount that we have to borrow. So our present value is just going to be how much we need to borrow on that loan. Right, so the monthly payment is going to be $1,242.
Is it because of the period? Like if it was like 15 years, it would have been much more, right?
Yeah, so we can test that out, right? So if it's over a 15-year time period, it'll be $1,800 a month, right? So the shorter the time frame that you're borrowing, the higher your monthly is going to be. But what's the benefit of that decision?
Is it less interest payments?
Yes, exactly, right? So we have a higher monthly, which hurts our cash flows more, but we're paying out less interest because we're paying down the balance a little quicker.
So while you're paying more in that moment, you're saving more over the.
Exactly. Yeah, it's trade-offs that people have to consider, right? And that trade-off is largely based on what interest rate you're paying, right? So, for example, I was lucky and got a mortgage before the Fed raised interest rates, right? So interest rates were relatively low. It was a relative no-brainer to me. I'll just go the longer time period, right? It's almost the rate of inflation that this mortgage was costing at that time, right? So relatively inexpensive mortgage. Interest rates have increased a lot since then, right? So it's significantly more expensive to be paying an interest on a mortgage. So the cost of holding onto that mortgage is a lot more. So yeah, having a higher monthly early on to avoid that additional mortgage expense might be worthwhile when you're dealing with higher interest rates, right? So it's just something to consider on a personal basis. What can your, what sort of monthly can you afford on your housing? And then compare that with how much interest are you going to be charged for that.
Can you calculate the total interest with that example?
Yep. All right, so let's see, I'm going to move this info to the side. All right, so we'll get, our total payout is going to be our monthly times the number of years that we're taking out the loan for, which is 30 years, times the number of months per year, 12. So our total payout is going to be $447,000. So the total amount of interest paid is the difference between how much we pay out and how much we borrowed. So we paid out $222,000 in interest.
Can you go back over total payout real quick?
Yep. Total payout is how much you're paying every month times the number of time periods you're paying for. All right, so I always forget the number. It's 30 times 12, what is that? 360?
360.
So 360 monthly payments that we're dealing with.
This might be like a really dumb question, but if what you're paying on the interest is more than what you paid on the loan for a house, do you think that's a bad investment?
Not necessarily. No. It depends on the situation, right? It's entirely possible to pay out more in interest than the initial value of the house, but as you build up equity over time, that tends to switch. That was part of the problem with the 2008 financial crisis is people were taking out really high interest rate loans with really highly inflated home values, and then when property values crashed, people were left with mortgages that were more expensive than the value of their house. So in a situation where your total equity value in the home or the total value of the house is less than the mortgage, then that could be a difficult situation to be in. But owing a lot of interest in general is not necessarily a bad thing. It depends what the interest is charged on. So if you're paying out that sort of interest on something like a new phone, that is not a good decision, right? There are kind of a lot of financing charges that are technically not interest that you're being billed, that you are actually being charged. So a good example I've noticed is with credit cards recently. They'll have a pay over time option, right? So I don't know if you've noticed, but whenever you make a purchase, very often you'll see little disclaimers like, hey, you can pay for this over a couple of months, right? Which in itself might be a good idea until you go and calculate how much you're being charged. They're basically baking in a fee that's technically not an interest rate. It's just the cost that they're charging you for extending your payment. So there are a lot of things that you shouldn't be willing to pay interest on, right? So don't pay payday loans, don't pay credit card interest rates, pay off your monthly every month. So paying interest on value-adding things is very often worthwhile. So one example is in education, right? I took out student loans when I was going through school, understanding what my potential salary range was going in the future, and it was worthwhile, right? I'm still paying off loans, and I will be for a long time, but the return on investment for making sure that I was able to finish my education was worth it based on the cost benefit of it. So, right, education, homes, vehicles, there's debate on whether it's worth taking out a loan for. I'm not convinced either way, really. Just kind of do what works best for your own finances. But yeah, it's usually not a good idea to pay significant interest on relatively smaller purchases like phones and stuff like that. But there are plenty of opportunities to pay interest if you start looking at how companies can charge you that. So that's it for the planned lecture. Like I said, I'll stick around for a while, answer any questions you have about the homework. Again, we're not meeting in class on Tuesday, so we're not meeting here Tuesday. Finish up all your units 1 and 2 assignments, and I'll see you Thursday next week.
We can use